Hey y'all, this is Blazing Diamond Rose. This is part 2 of Locust of Locust of Control. Today is June 27th. I'm going to be uploading these videos a little late because I want to try to go through and get the videos done first. Normally I will upload them right away, but according to my statistics, it's not like my views are very high. So whoever sees them and understands them, right? Whoever's able to receive them, God be willing, let them receive it and take it up with the Lord on the message that He wants to get to you specifically, whoever you may be. Now, so in this video, I'm gonna try to hone in on the Piper bandwagon, God's amphitheater, and the chosen. Matthew 11:16-20 says, Jesus says the people are like little children who play the flute, but neither John nor Jesus dance for them, nor fit their false accusations or stereotypes. Right? So I'm going to go into that right quick. I'm going to go to that. Actually, I feel the need to read that. And I'm going to hone in on some particular parts, right? Because in this particular chapter, John is arrested. He's in prison, right? He's in prison because Herod threw him in prison, right? Because his wife, which was actually his niece, was angry that John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin, was rebuking King Herod about marrying his niece and how incestuous and against the law that was, even for their times at that particular time and context. And that his what we know what ended up happening to John was was King Herod's niece, his wife, her daughter, which was also his blood relative, performed some type of seductive, alluring dance on her birthday, right? And he was so entertained, right, by this sensuous dance that he told her whatever she asked, whatever she wished, whatever she wanted, he would grant to her. And she went to her mother, which was again his niece, right? And her mother told her to ask him to have Jesus' cousin beheaded, which again was John the Baptist, right? So this is right before that happened, where he's just being held in prison, right? And he's stressing and he's hurt, right? So the stresses of him being in prison begin to get to him, right? And so he tells the disciples to go ask Jesus if he's really the Messiah. Now, it's important to specifically take note of this situation, because John was the one who introduced Jesus, who automatically recognized him, from the time he was a baby, while he was still in his mother's womb, Elizabeth. And while Mary was only probably like a month pregnant, right? He recognized Jesus in the spirit, right, as it says in Luke 1:44, recognized him in the spirit and leaped for joy at the sound of that Mary, that particular Mary, Jesus' mother's voice. He recognized the baby, right? They had a soul connection. Okay, so again, when Jesus was coming across the Lake of Galilee, John immediately recognized him as the Messiah and introduced him to the rest of the people that were following John. He said, like, ooh, this is the Messiah. You know what I'm saying? He didn't just point out, oh, this is my cousin. He said, no, this is the Messiah, the Son of God, right? And he pointed it out to him, right? And he wanted Jesus to baptize him, and Jesus was like, no, I need you to baptize me. This is more proper this way, right? As Jesus humbling himself, right? On the level of his brethren, right? Not that he was denying his authority, but that he was humbling himself before his family and before the rest of the community, right? So it's important to note that in this situation that this particular, he's heartbroken, he's gut-wrenched, his spirit is under turmoil, right? So it's not that he doesn't know or all of a sudden forgot who Jesus was. It's that he's stressing, he's want to make sure while he's about to die, possibly, that Jesus sticks to his mission, right? So he tells his disciples to go ask Jesus if he's the Messiah. Basically, what I get from it is that he's going to continue on with his mission. He's going to do what he came there to do. That John is not in prison and about to die for nothing. He's not just going to die if he's about to die, it's not about to be death just for his relative. It's about to be death for Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God, right? And if he lives and survives, it's going to be because, right, his faith in God ultimately, in that of his own character and his own trust in what God has said and what we'll do through Jesus, right? But this is important to note that. So let me go ahead and get into that. When Jesus had finished giving the instructions to his 12 disciples, he went on from there to teach and preach in their Galilean cities. Now, when John the Baptist in prison heard about the activities of Christ, he sent word by his disciples and asked him, "Are you the expected one, the Messiah? Or should we look for another? Should we look for someone else? Who will be the promised one?" Jesus answered, "Go and report to John what you hear and what you see." Go and report to John, his cousin, right? What you hear and what you see. The blind receive the sight. The blind receive their sight. The lame walk. The lepers are cleansed by healing, and the deaf hear, and the dead are raised. The poor have the gospel preached to them, and blessed, joyful, favored by God is he who does not take offense at Jesus. He who does not take offense at me accepting me as the Messiah and trusting confidently in my message of salvation. Now, let's take note of that right quick. That it was like his response is, go tell John what you see. Go tell John what's happening. Go tell John what he's doing. Exactly. Now, in this day and age of trial and tribulation and in the uproar of the Antichrist agenda and whatnot, what do we see? What do we see happening? Do we see the lame walking? Do we see the dead rising? Right? Do we see the blind receiving sight? What do we see? Right? What's happening? Is it Jesus? Or is it something else? Right? Is it what the Messiah would do? It's what will happen if the Messiah was present and we're walking like we know we're saved and we're living and exercising our salvation, if we're living out our God-given purpose? Is that what we're seeing? Is that what we're experiencing? Is that what we see in our visions? Is that what we hear in our ears? That's what's going on around us, right? If it's not, then we're still in the world. We're still under trial. We're still under tribulation. We're still in the fire, right? We're still under testing, right? We're still surrounded by smoke and mirrors. That we need the word of God, the sword of the Spirit, the helmet of salvation, right? We need prayer and fasting. We need abstinence, right? We need to focus on what we've already been given, the peace that we've already been given, because he doesn't come to bring peace. He's already gave us peace, right? Which was his word, his presence, his Holy Spirit, right? So when he comes, he's bringing his sword. He's bringing who's already supposed to be committed to him, to discern, to cut through the mobs, the crowds, right? The mud, right? And rise up like those lotus flowers, right? As these men were going away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. What did you go out in the wilderness to see? Now he's trying to confirm that, who John is, right? As these men were going away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. What did you go out in the wilderness to see? John was of the wilderness, right? He was a wild man, but he was kind of like a eunuch. He didn't eat nothing but wild locusts and honey, right? He was like a vegetarian, and all he would do was evangelize, right? As these men were going away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. What did you go out in the wilderness to see? A reed shaken by the wind, which is commonplace. What did you go out to see? A man dressed in soft clothing, entirely unsuited for the harsh desert? That's not how he was dressed, right? He didn't walk around. What did he walk around with? A loincloth? Right? Did he walk around in robes like Jesus? He was a little more he was a little more wild looking, right? A little more savage looking, right? But he still had a heart like Jesus, right? Those who wear soft clothing are in places of kings. But what did you really go out and see? A prophet. Yes, I tell you, and one more eminent, more remarkable, and far more than a prophet, who foretells the future. This is the one whom it is written by the prophet Malachi. Now again, he's talking about John, right? Behold, I send my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you. I assure you, most solemnly say to you, among those born of women, there has not risen anyone greater than John the Baptist. Yet, the one who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater in privilege than he. Now he's talking about himself, right? Right? Now, he's like saying that John was like the kind of like the headliner, or what he just say, right? Preparing the way for him, introducing him, right? And before Jesus there was nobody greater than John, right? Among women. But the one who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater in privilege than he. So he's talking about himself, right? From the days, because John was not the Messiah, right? He was pointing to the Messiah, right? From the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffers violent assault, and violent men seize it by force as precious prize. Now it's talking about people use violence and abuse to try to take over, to claim things, to try to get revenge, to try to claim what they believed was theirs, or to just simply take what they wanted, right? They were violent. That's not what Jesus was coming for. That's not what Jesus' mode was. His method was not violence. It was not carnal. It was not just simply going snatching people up. He didn't just go to the Romans and whatever and try to take them out, right? He was trying to Show his example, exercise his example, reason with them, for them to see, for them to have an epiphany of sorts, right? Which actually ended up happening with Constantine, right? And Pilate's wife, which, was partly the reason why he washed his hands and didn't want to have nothing to do with it and what said is on the crowd, right? Anyway, right? I assure you and most solemnly say to you, among those born of woman there has not risen anyone greater than John the Baptist. Yet the one who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater in privilege than he. From the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffers violent assault, and violent men seize it by force as a precious prize. For all the prophets in law prophesied up until John. And if you are willing to accept it, John himself is the fulfillment of Elijah as the messenger who was to come before the kingdom. Now I said John is the fulfillment of Elijah, not the fulfillment of the Messiah, right? John himself is the fulfillment of Elijah as the messenger who was to come before the kingdom. He who has ears to hear, let him hear and heed my words, right? That's Jesus breaking down Barney style, whose cousin John the Baptist was and represented, right? His beloved cousin at that, his beloved apostle, right? Beloved, right? He loved his cousin, right? But to what shall I compare this generation? Is it like the children sitting in the marketplaces who call to the others and say, we pipe the flute for you, right? And you did not dance. We wailed sad dirges, playing funeral songs, and you did not mourn or cry aloud. For John came neither eating nor drinking with others, and yet they say he had a demon. John seemed like he was in a perpetual fast mode, right? Perpetually fasting and praying, but yet they try to say he had a demon because they didn't like what he was saying, right? They didn't like how he was rebuking them. He came off kind of like Paul, right? Real stern, right? Authoritative and clear, right? But they tried to say he had a demon, right? The Son of Man came eating and drinking with others. Now it's talking about Jesus, right? The Son of Man came eating and drinking with others, and they say, look, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners, right? Including non-observant Jews. Yet wisdom is justified and vindicated by her deeds in the lives of those who respond to me. Now what did he say? Wisdom is justified and vindicated by her deeds in the lives of those who respond to Jesus. Wisdom, right? It's talking about wisdom. Whatever knowledge, intelligence we think we have is vindicated by how we respond to the Lord. It's vindicated by how we live in acceptance of Christ, right? How we live in acceptance of Christ in our lives. How we accept him as salvation, right? Our wisdom, what we claim to know, the wealth of knowledge we claim to have is justified and vindicated, right? By how we respond directly to God's Son, right? How we respond directly to the Father through Jesus. How we respond and go directly to the Father in prayer, right? So what I was saying was, it's kind of like that Piper story, how these they had an antichrist. He's kind of like an antichrist dude, right? He's trying to get all the rats. Then later he's trying to get all the children to go drown in the lake, in the sewer, or the lake of fire, right? He's trying to get them to follow his music. He's trying to get all these snakes, all these scorpions, right? All these lion cubs, right? This is how deep it is, right? Remember, think about Psalm 91 and Luke 10:19. He's trying to get all these snakes, these lion cubs, right? These lionesses, right? These little Mickey Mouses and Minnies, right? These little Plutos and Goofies. He's trying to get them all to go jump in the sea and die, right? But he's playing music for them and trying to get them to be sad or mournful, or be overtly joyous, kind of like how them people were when the Titanic was sinking. Yeah, they refused to believe the Titanic was going to sink, so they kept playing the what the heck was they playing, the violin and the guitar, and trying to get people to dance like nobody's business, like it didn't matter, right? Just disregard that their big old ship that they thought was unsinkable was about to just sink because it crashed into this big iceberg that they only saw the tip of, right? Instead of trying to think about how they can make efficient those rafts, right? They want to dance and sing and drink wine, right? And what did Jesus say? The same thing as in Matthew 24. The same thing that happened with Noah. The people refused, thought he was just crazy, and so they still partying, being debaucherous and whatnot, right? Until they get all flooded out, and Noah and his family is just away on this ship. It's kind of like he's just like in this super glued container, right? Impenetrable, while they're just all drowning, right? Or the water is up to the mountain peaks. It's over the mountain peaks, the highest mountains you can imagine. The water is over that, right? Right? The plague of locusts and the rise of Gideons for Armageddon. Exodus 10, Judges 7, Mennonites and Amalekites as numerous as locusts. Mennonite means strife in place of judgment. Amalekites, it says it means those who lick blood specifically, and they was noted as being a very specific enemy of relative but yet specific enemy of the Hebrews, right? They were very unprovoked. I went over this before. Revelation 16:16, Satan and Antichrist demons gather, stir the armies of the world against Jerusalem. Right? Now, to quickly go over that part, is what I was talking about, right? We're in a gathering. It's a great gathering going on, right? Where it talks about, again, in Matthew 24, right? Where God will send his angels from one end of the world to the other, right? To gather up his faithful, to gather up his called, to gather up his remnant, right? But at the same time, they have these antichrist demons, antichrist entities that are trying to stir up strife and stir up all the armies, stir up inter-turmoil, right, within the nations, within the communities. So they gather around Jerusalem, or gather around Jerusalem as a whole in the spirit realm, but also in the physical realm. Eventually, it starts first in the spirit, though. Whatever happens first, or is first initiated or planted in the spirit, and then it's up to the mind, your conscious mind, to decide what you're going to actually choose to manifest, right? So these things are trying to stir up first in the spirit, trying to take who they can take out in the spirit, right? Trying to hope so that they can manifest their demolition, right, in the physical realm, right? That's again why he says that our enemies attack us the most while we're asleep or while we're weak, or attacks our most vulnerable, our babies, right? Trying to mess with the women, mess with the babies while they're still in the womb or while they're still babies, trying to mess with the DNA, while they're trying to mess with the handicapped, the people in the hospitals, while they're trying to keep people doped up on medications. They're not fully in their mind or can fully protest. They may be fully conscious, but yet their mind is numb. They're like awake and aware, but yet they can't speak. They can't protest. They're like muted, catatonic. There's so many different forms of that I can go into, right? Where they may not even be mentally disabled, but they could just be in a hospital injured or something, but they can't protest it, but yet their mind is under attack by these spiritual entities, these demonic spiritual entities, right? So it's on all these levels that the demonic entities, the antichrist entities of the world, are at the same time trying to stir up strife and gather around, right? Close in, right, on God's people from every angle that they can, right? And again, so it's like all these locusts, right? So it's kind of like Gideon against the Midianites again, but it's way more complex than that, because not every locust is against God. Not every grasshopper, right, is a demon. You know, some of them, and even if their name is Cain or whatever, they actually, you know what I mean? They could be walking, but it could be humble, right? And they're just waiting to defend what God calls them to defend, right? And so in this sense that they're trying to hone in on that 144, right? They're focused in and fixated on that 144 that I briefly mentioned in the first video, right? Now again, what did it say? That 144,000 out of what, like 8 billion, 8.3 billion, that's only 0.0018%. That's only what, a single person out of 55,000 out of a stadium, in a packed stadium, like think of a ballpark stadium or softball stadium, whatever. There's only like one single person out of 55,000 in a major city of 1 million residents. What it said, it's only like 18 people. But that 144, I seriously believe it's the eunuchs, right? And I'm not talking about people who've castrated themselves, right? That Jesus talks about, there's different parts in the Bible. That's an extreme form of that was an extreme form of punishment and of dedication. Some priests believe that they needed to do that to be able to be fully committed to the calling, but that's not actually a commandment. Nowhere in there is actually a commandment that God says that so and so needs to be castrated. It says circumcised, not castrated. And then yet circumcision is most, again, focused more on the mind, the spirit, because you can cut off your arm and still feel like you have an arm because you didn't change your thought in your mind, right? You didn't renew, right? Renew or refresh the thought in your mind, so your mind still having pseudo feelings like it still has an arm when the arm's been cut off, right? So what's the point of that, right? So Jesus was talking about in the New Testament, focus more on the spirit, how your spirit guides your body. Get your spirit right with God, right? Get your heart right with Him, because that's what governs everything else. All the issues of the body, all the issues of the life come ultimately from the heart. That's why we're supposed to guard it. That's why we're supposed to give it to God for Him to lead it, right? And so this 144, I believe, is eunuchs of the heart. They're circumcised in the heart. They're committed, right? They're truly committed in every single way, that they believed, like what he was talking about, that it's just a time of profound need for abstinence on always level. They're not waiting for Jesus to come back in the world, and they're waiting, but they're preparing themselves now. They're like those virgins, right, who put an oil in their lamps, right? They're not waiting to the last minute to put oil in their lamps, and then they can't walk with the Lord, right? They can't go help find the lost. They can't go help retrieve them. They don't have no oil. They don't have no faith. They're running dry, right? And how does the world try to pervert that? They try to turn their devotions into something perverted, something sensual, something sexual, or something violent. They turn those energies into something carnal instead of something spiritual, right? Something holy, something righteous. So they try to divert our energies, right, into what's not holy. And so that's again why it's important for us to go to God, right? But that's what I believe these 144 are, because they seek to renew themselves daily in that, right? But what I was saying was, these are like the priests, the highest calling. They truly see themselves as priests, as leaders of their family, to try to help them. There are very few, though. It says in Matthew 19:11, not everyone can accept the word. Not everyone can accept that word, right? They're just, they may believe they're married, so they don't believe they need to do that or are called to do that, right? So, or they believe they have children. Because they have children, they can't do that. Or they want to have more children, they can't do that, right? For some reason, they feel that they can't live without carnality. Or even if it's not about sex, they can only think as in physical weapons, as what I was talking about in my other video as well. All the weaponries of the world, they're so focused on weapons, right? The weapon this, weapon that, right? But not renewing, refreshing the mind. And if they are focused on the mind, they're focused on how to manipulate. They're more focused on how to manipulate the mind instead of to heal the mind, right? They're focused on how to manipulate and deceive people, and spies and stuff like that, and espionage versus healing people, right? Rehabilitating people, right? They're more focused on how to manipulate to get their way, right? Or if that don't work, just take them out, right? So, that's not the way of the Lord. That's not the way of heaven. And ultimately, that's not going to help us overcome genocide, right? Ultimate genocidal mentality on a grand scheme, right? But fortunately, like I was saying, in the unfathomable, those who overcome the tribulations, Revelation 7:9-17, Matthew 19:9-15, 19:17-30, right? So there's still going to be an unfathomable amount of survivors, an unfathomable amount of overcomers. And when we're talking about that, we're talking about all the people who have already passed from this world, who've already died, who've already been in the grave, who've already been redeemed, and then the people who are here now, and the people yet to be born, right? Unfathomable amount that will be saved because of Jesus and because of these 144 with him, right? Called up with him. Unfathomable amount, right? That doesn't mean we should be lackadaisy, right? just complacent and stuff, to a point that we should still seek to do our part, because those people are overcome because of they still seek the Lord in their own lives. So just because you may feel like you're not called to be some priest or some nun, right? You still have a purpose to fulfill as a father, or as a mother, as a wife, or as a teacher, as a lawyer, as a president, right? As an actor, right? Some people feel like actors are like mercenaries, in the sense of they just take on any role for the money, right? But what message? The better actors you become, the better choice options you have, the roles that you choose to take on, right? So whatever you try to express or bring to the forefront of the world, of the nation, right? That sends a message. On what lasting message do you want to leave, or do you want to give? Do you want to send out? That you want to echo in eternity, right? So, so I'm just saying, just think about that, right? Everyone has a role. Everyone has a part that's significant to God. We just gotta be able to recognize what He wants to do. What He's already given us, how to exalt and magnify the gifts He's already given us, right? In a holy, in a righteous way. Not in a typical common way, but in a righteous way. In an uncommon way, right? The shrouded, the shrewd, those born for adversity, 144,000, right? Or actually, I believe we're all born for adversity, but in a certain extent, right? Because some people may have a higher calling or more specific calling than others. Like what it says, what I was saying the other day, in when Jesus was talking and telling the people about, why do they worry about clothes? Right? Why are you worried about tomorrow? What you gonna do tomorrow or next week? Or what you gonna eat or what you gonna drink, right? If you can't even add 1 hour to your life, if you can't do such a small thing, why do you worry about anything else? Right? So he was talking about some people have different. What I get from that, some people have different responsibilities. You can't do that. But some people may be able to do that. Some people may be in a position where they can influence that. Like Esther, or like King Jehoshaphat, right? Now, Esther, I've mentioned several times before, but like King Jehoshaphat, he was, what book was that? Anyway, he was up against, let me go to that right quick. Oh, yes. Right? In 2 Chronicles 20, verse 3, or 2 Chronicles 20, right? It goes into how King Jehoshaphat and his people were about to be under attack by the Moabites and the Ammonites. And remember, the Moabites and the Ammonites were descendants of incest through Lot. His daughters, he had got drunk and his daughters thought they was on survival mode, right? And so they went into their father, right? And which spawned the Moabites and the Ammonites, right? But eventually it also gave birth to Ruth, and Jesus was able to renew the bloodline, heal the bloodline, offer redemption for the bloodline through himself, right? Through his spirit and through his actions. But anyway, right? These are, in this particular context, we're talking about their descendants, Moabites and the Ammonites, right? Huge numbers of people, right, about to attack Jehoshaphat, right? And so he ends up calling a fast. He doesn't even try to attack them with weapons. He ends up calling a fast, right? And God actually causes his enemies, these enemies, to turn on themselves, right? They start playing music and dancing and whatnot. The irony in that, right? After the fast, they start playing music and celebrating as if war isn't about to happen or something, as if they're not surrounded with people with mad cannonballs and and fire torches and whatever the heck weapons they had, right? They just playing music, like having a symphony, right? But what ends up happening while they're playing this music and dancing, that God turns his enemies against themselves, to where all his enemies kill themselves and they take themselves out. They turn on each other, right? So that was just right before him. That was manifested right before them. That was in time, right? The thing that happened with Esther is like, it was kind of like a little slow roll a little bit, right? Where she had called the fast, and then she went and asked God to give her courage to go before the king, because her position was to try to influence the king, to try to position him like what we're supposed to do with God, right? We don't have the same exact power as God, obviously, right? But we're called to seek him and petition him, humble ourselves before him, recognizing that he's greater than us, but yet he's greater within us and greater around us, right? So in that symbolism, right, she humbled herself and sought God for strength to be able to influence and seek petition from her husband, who was actually a pagan king. But yet her influence, her humility, her position moved him to see her, to understand her point of view, her perspective, and help save her people in that time. Where it flipped the script, right? Her people who were about to be annihilated at the command of influences of the king's counselor, Hammer, right? This dude ended up actually being killed, and his descendants end up being killed. Not completely annihilated, but almost, right? But her people, her descendants, her uncle Mordecai, they were saved, right? But it took a little bit longer. It was a little bit more drawn out. Whereas in this situation with Jehoshaphat, it was immediate. But God's over time. God is over time, right? So he can slow it down. He can speed it up. He can reverse it any way he chooses, right? Because he's God, right? But it's about what his purpose of it is, what his purpose of it is for, and how it glorifies him in his kingdom, how it magnifies him and his people, the righteousness of his people. Key word, how it magnifies the righteousness of his people and him in his people, right? So some people are born for a particular calling, a particular position in time. And again, it's not about just them sitting up wearing a crown, wearing a tiara, right? Wearing some fancy robe with some big long train behind it, right? It's about their responsibility. That train represents the responsibility they have. All those people following them, right? Right? It's not just, ooh, look at this big train behind me. Like, it's just like the crown. They say the crown is heavy. Around the crown is light, but it's not just some fancy jewel on the head. It represents the people they're called to lift up, right? By their actions, by their lives, how they lead and guide their people, right? So in these particular circumstances, it says a brother is born for adversity. So sometimes a brother is born to be called in certain situations, brother, sister, mother, father, auntie, uncle, cousin. You get what I'm saying, right? In any given situation, to called in a particular situation of adversity to help the people, right? To help call the people out the world, to help call the people to God, guide the people, lead the people, retrieve the people, right? Release the captives, save the captives, free the people, right? Remind them of their own liberty and freedom, right? Sometimes they're in position, like another example was Moses, right? Some may believe might not be as obvious that he was born for adversity, but yeah, he was, right? Because he could just, what does it say in Hebrews 11:24, right? Let me go to that right quick. in Hebrews 11, it's talking about just all the fathers, sisters, aunties, cousins, whatever, people foundational in their faith, prominent people in faith, right? And how their faith saved them and led them, right? But yet God has them on reserve. God is holding them on reserve for the rest of us, for the generation of now, so we can come together in the present, right? And a full epiphany, right? Verse 23, by faith, Moses, after his birth, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a beautiful and divinely favorite child, and they were not afraid of the Pharaoh's decree. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, right? Because he preferred, key word, right? By faith, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, because he preferred to endure the hardship of the people of God rather than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. Now that's the key word right there, and that's the key distinction also in the story of Esther, right? Her cousin came up to her, or her uncle came up to her, right, and sought her help. Her initial response was like, hey, I can't do that. That's against the law. I'll get killed. Right? He doesn't even, her husband didn't even know that she was of Jewish descent. He just thought that he picked her in a contest. Right? That she was his bee queen. Right? He didn't even realize who all she was and what she was supposed to represent. But she wouldn't even been in that situation, or got in there, it hadn't been for her uncle, right? Trying to save her life, trying to save her from orphanage. So it was just like, did she forget all that, right? So he went up to her, was like, not to imagine that just because she's in a position of authority, that she's been made a queen, that okay, that she can, if she only decides to only be concerned about herself and her position, that she'll be saved, right? And that she can just stand by and not try to do anything, not anything at all, not even pray to help her family, to help her descendants, to help her people, right? And just tries to save herself, right? He said, hey, that she won't be saved. Her and her father's family, her lineage will go down, right? Her lineage will be destroyed, but yet the people of Israel will still rise up, a helper, somebody else. God will bring someone else at some other time to help save the people, right? Which is, what God did countless times, right? Ultimately with Jesus. And so that's kind of the irony in the deja vu moment, right? That kind of like occurred with John the Baptist when he was in prison under turmoil. Telling his disciples, go ask Jesus if he's the Messiah. You know what I'm saying? He gonna go do what he was supposed to do, what he was born to do, right? While he's in prison, while John is in prison, his cousin, his blood cousin, the one that leaped for joy, right? When he was still a baby, still in the womb for him, right? Leaped for joy in the soul, recognized him in the spirit. And yet, all of a sudden, he asked him if he the Messiah, right? Because if he not, he want to know, should the people look for another, right? So, and even in that sense where it seems like he's faithless, he's testing, he's gauging, right? He's I want to say chastising, but reminding Jesus of what he was for, and trying to see if Jesus forgot, right? Because he didn't forget, but he's just stressed out. And Jesus, what was his response? Go tell John what you see. What's happening? What's he doing? Right? Right? And so to remind him to be encouraged, right? So in this, since that was the distinctive factor, that he could have just chose to stay hidden, just chose to stay hidden or being seen or treated as, ooh, I'm this prince. The people like me as I am right now. They treat me well. I'm in all these fine robes, right? They praise me. I'm praised, right? And I'm put in the spotlight. You know what I'm saying? And it's just like, yet he snapped when he found out that he was really Hebrew. He had to have an innate feeling that he was, but when he snapped, when he was found out, he received a revelation that Hebrew was his true lineage, and then he sees a Hebrew being beaten nearly to death by an Egyptian soldier, and he steps in because he snaps. He didn't just rebuke the soldier and tell him to fall back. He damn near, he kills him and then buries him in the sand. That's how over the edge he went over someone beating on his people, someone that he recognized as part of his family, recognized as a part of him, right? He snapped. He went over there. He just completely disregarded the position he was in, the position and influence he held as being treated as a prince. He didn't care about any of that. He wasn't thinking about any of that. All that went out the window. It's like he saw his brother or his mother or his sister or his child or his cousin, the grandpa, whoever, being beaten nearly to death by some stranger or some abuser, some enemy, right? And he went on it and executed it, right? But the irony on that as well, when he tried to get in between an argument, stop an argument with his people were having the next day, right? They were like, who are you to tell us anything? Now these are Hebrew slaves. He's like, who are you to tell us anything? Like, who appointed you? What did they say? Who appointed you judge over us? Right? Who gave you authority to tell us what to do? Do you want to kill us like you killed that Egyptian yesterday? No, like what? I was like what? I was like, what are you talking about, right? And it was like he thought wasn't nobody there, nobody around, but yet that's what they bring up to him when he tries to help them, mediate for them, squash them from arguing and fighting with each other. That's what their response was. They didn't even know Egyptians come up to him like that. That's how his own people responded to him and trying to help him. He was like, what? And then from that moment, he responded and decided to run away, right? Because his people came at him, right? Yeah, that was fascinating. But so in this sense, right? And then he wanted to stay away. He didn't even want to go back after that. But he was compelled to go back because God made him go back. He was compelled to go back because God made him go back. He didn't want to go back. He was trying to find a way not to. Right? And all because his people came at him that way. But God made him go back. Compelled him to go back. Right? Because he was born for adversity. That's what he was actually born for. What he was allowed to live for. What God spared his life for. It wasn't the Egyptians that spared his life in the river. It wasn't Herod. It wasn't Satan. Right? It wasn't the Pharaoh. It was God who allowed his life to be spared. Right? Just like it wasn't the Pharaoh who spared Joseph in the prison when he was sold into prison, and yet what was it, the butler or the baker or whatever, and some other dude up in there was killed, but yet they didn't kill Joseph, right? It wasn't because the Pharaoh ultimately spared him. It was because God spared him, right? Allowed him to be spared. So that's how God can even influence, and it's known. It's like there's nothing God can't do. He can ultimately influence our enemies as well as us, right? That's where it says in Isaiah 8:13, it says, do not fear, that he's the one that we should fear. He's the Lord of hosts, right? You know, why all these things come against us, ultimately, he's the game in the game in the game. He's the ultimate prize, the ultimate treasure, right? Right? He's the ultimate, right? So it's like, do not call, what it said, there's another part in there that says, do not call everything conspiracy or a confederacy that these people call conspiracy or confederacy. Seek the Lord, right? Seek God. Seek God's guidance on it. Don't follow the murmurings and rumors of people. Go specifically to the Lord and seek for him how to lead you, so you don't just be running in hysteria or fear or anything else, as if you don't have no God and no faith, and then you end up crying out to the Lord and in darkness, but not crying out in faith, crying out in bitterness, crying out in anger, crying out in confusion, crying out in cursing, which I'm going to talk about in the next video, because I'm going to cut this video short right about now. But where the renegade daughter of Zion ends up cursing God, in anger, in heartache, in confusion. That doesn't mean that that's her, she's going to burn in hell. Because God recognizes why she's crying out in anguish, right? So I'm going to go into that in the next video. So, like, sometimes we cry out, right? We're angry. We don't understand things, right? So even then, that doesn't mean that's our ultimate end. It's like we could be just thinking those things in our head, confused, right? But God knows everything. He can discern everything. But it's how we approach him, how we end up humbling ourselves. How do we accept rebuke when he does try to rebuke us? Because being rebuked, repentance is a gift. It's not automatic. We can't even repent or really turn away unless God initiates that ability for us, right? He has to initiate that. He has to plant that seed. He has to give us that nudge to want to turn back to him, right? So we can't even fully turn around and repent and humble ourselves without God initiating that. Because, again, he's the ultimate initiator, right? And the ultimate finisher, and everything in between that is good, right? So, again, that's the amphitheater of God, right? There's that gibberish, right? And to where we need the sword of the Spirit, we need him to seek guidance. So we need to be able to receive his rebuke, right? So that we can better encourage others. We can better lead others. We can better point to him by our own life, by our own actions, right? So I'm going to cut this short right now. And in my next video, I'm going to go in on God's amphitheater. The renegade daughter of Zion raises her voice. The crucible, the crescent, and the cross. And what would you exchange for your soul? Would you cast lots for another? Would you hope for karma or reincarnation instead of rebirth and redemption? Would you prefer a video game vendor over heaven on earth? How would you escape the wrath and full vengeance of God? Will the sun stand still for you? Right? Vomit. Right? I'm going to talk about vomit. Meta dimensions and delusions of grandeur. Right? Alright, so that's going to be all in my next video, the Council of Apostles and Elders. Right? Wormholes, black holes, ripples, reprobates. Right? But to sum this video up again, right? There's pied pipers playing, right? There's music playing. There's funeral dirges playing for us, right? There's the Antichrist trying to get us to to go jump in the lake, right? There's people with no authority, right? Trying to treat us like snakes and scorpions and lion cubs, right? There's people trying to close doors and open doors when they don't have the keys of the kingdom, right? We don't need to follow those things. We don't need to listen to it. We don't need to dance for those things, right? They're not. Simon is not Jesus. This is mad Simons. There's only one Jesus, right? So all them Simons are stumbling blocks, right? How you gonna stumble on someone who has keys, right? How are you gonna stumble on someone who has keys? Remember, said Jesus gave Peter the keys of the kingdom. Why did he do that? Right? Are we called to follow Peter? We're called to follow Jesus. We're not called to follow Peter. We're not called to follow Simon. We're called to follow Jesus. But yet, Peter had keys to the kingdom. It's like being in a prison and you have the keys to go out. What do you need keys to go in for if you're already in it? If you're already the owner of the estate? It talks about in Galatians 4. If you're already the owner of the castle or the kingdoms, the ultimate kingdoms. We're not talking about worldly kingdoms. We're talking about heavenly kingdoms. What you need to go in for if that's already your residence? That's already your home court. You don't need to go into your body. Right? You're already your body. Right? There's a verse in the Bible that says it's not what goes into the body that defiles it. It's what comes out of it. Right? It's what's released. It's what's set free. It's what liberates. Right? So keep that in mind on what liberty that we hold as children of God. As brothers and sisters, as cousins, as mothers and fathers, aunts and uncles, as siblings, right? What liberty we hold as a whole, right? So it makes it more defined on when things try to come from the outside of us. First of all, what's already in us? What can we release that quell the whole situation? You know, what can we release? Right? What can we set free? What can we redeem? What can we offer redemption? Right? Are we holding ourselves prisoner in some delusionary realm? Or are we holding on to the realities of God and our faith? Right? So anyway, I don't want to remind you that's what basically that's what to sum up this video, right? It's about the 144, but not just the 144 chosen eunuchs, but the unfathomable that you can't even you can't even put a ballpark figure on, right? That it's out the park, completely out the park, right? There's this like they over everything, right? But that number is still growing. That's still in the present. That's still now, right? That's still the generation of now. That's still what's happening, right? That's still what's developing. That's still what is initiating and forthcoming. That's still what's being born, right? That unfathomable number of overcomers. Now, what specifically do they overcome? The tribulations. The trials and tribulations, again, that are happening now, right? And that's a combination of all our people from all time, right? So it's a gathering. It's a great gathering. There's a great siphoning. There's a great sifting, a filtering of determining those people, recognizing those people, lifting those people up, and putting down and tearing down strongholds. Tearing down delusions, right? Tearing down lies, right? reforming ourselves from false seductions, things trying to put us to sleep, trying to sedate us, right? Trying to give us roofies, but ain't taking us nowhere high, right? Want us to see rainbows, right? But not offering us salvation. They're not a promise. They're covenant breakers, right? So that's not what we want to be able to discern in this time of now, right? So the next video, I'm going to go in about the renegade daughter, God's amphitheater, and a crucible crescent in the cross. God bless.